Stars
Podcast. This is the
Let me talk to you. This is such good shit.
Right on. This is the Five Starr Wrestling Report podcast, and you are currently tuned into the Monday edition of our 2-episode weekly podcast. Here to bring you some wrestling recaps and article discussions on the show today. If you are new to the show, please make sure you subscribe and smash the like button to let me know you enjoyed the content we discussed today. Also, if you could do me a quick favor and leave a comment down below just to share your general thoughts on the material we talk about on today's show. And if you are a returning viewer as well, please make sure you feel free to follow the same protocol. Again, we have a Monday and Friday show here on the FSWR channel, exclusive to YouTube and Rumble. And we also have a packed show for today, including wrestling recaps on AEW Rampage from Friday night and Ring of Honor's Final Battle show from this past weekend. And to cap off the show, we will be taking a look at one of my most recent Chairshot articles on AEW, which will analyze 3 specific areas of necessary focus in 2022. All of this which will be covered in great detail today. No NWA Power report. It does not appear that they have filmed a new set of tapings following the Hard Times event. So keep an eye on that and see when their next set of tapings is. They might honestly just be holding off until start of the new year, which probably isn't a bad idea. But as always, we will begin with our AEW Rampage report from December 10th. I feel like I should just start calling the show Pandemonium. I think Rampage is giving it too much of a positive spin. At least Pandemonium has a more authentic connotation as to how this entire show really comes across on television. Especially this show, and that was ever so apparent after this edition of Too Much Shit Going On Wrestling. We begin with a very hoarse Excalibur comically trying to rush his way through the opening lines before his voice totally gave out. And that immediately bleeds into this Lucha Bros FTR tag title match. No entrances, by the way. Because again, too much crap booked for the hours, so we have to cut out multiple entrances and rush through every ring introduction to be able to cram everything in effectively. Now that said, let me get my positive note in here. This was a mildly inoffensive Lucha Bros match, which I know does not sound like much of a positive critique, but believe you me, after having ranted about countless Lucha Bros matches and the fact that I really can't stand them, you should probably take this as a compliment. If for no other reason than for the first time in God knows how long, we actually had a modicum of tag team wrestling with Phoenix and Pentagon, where they actually tagged in and out. I know, crazy, right? And of course, I don't need to further elaborate on how great FTR is. That kind of goes without saying. Honestly, I would not have been surprised at all if they ended up laying out the majority of this match from start to finish and they sat the Lucha Bros down before the show and said, all right, look, motherfuckers, we're going to do this match and we're going to actually try to have some semblance of an actual tag team professional wrestling match. So just follow our lead. Just limit the bullshit in the 5-minute double team move spots and just let us carry the bulk of the work. And it probably was better off for it. Now that said, it was not a perfect FTR match. And again, this goes back to my whole problem with, AEW trying to make every title match a semi-main WrestleMania style match where everyone kicks out of everything and it just gets way too cute and ridiculous by the end. And I'll talk about that pretty extensively in the Ring of Honor recap, but let me just talk about an example of what really bothered me here. They do this great old school heat spot here, where Cash goes to try and hit Phoenix with one of the AAA tag belts on the outside, which they acknowledge was how FTR won the belts in the first place when they beat the Lucha Bros on television. But this time, Phoenix stops him. He tries to yank the belt away, and somehow in there, Rick Knox got bummed, so, at least they didn't make him out to look like a complete moron here. But Phoenix ends up decking Dax with the belt unintentionally. So they do the Eddie Brock spot where after Dax is laying out cold with the belt underneath of him, Phoenix goes up to the top rope and tries to do the frog splash. But instead of him connecting with it, Dax ends up sneaking up the belt so Phoenix goes face first into it. And of course, Dax is a pro, so he made sure he concealed the belt so Knox didn't see it. Although with, AEW referees, he can never tell if he'd even call for the bell anyway, so what difference does it make? But the long-winded point to all this is they do this really clever-looking angle, and it was a false finish. Because again, they have to do more shit. They can't fucking take it home when they actually do something remotely crafty that in any other era of professional wrestling where people had a clue would have been a finish. And of course, fast forward to the end, we get every video game spot ever contrived on a console. They're doing every no-sell trick in the book. None of it is as memorable as the belt angle from earlier. And somehow Phoenix and Penta retained. I think they hit their double cradle spike pile driver combo, which the camera almost missed because they were filming Phoenix doing a running dive to Dax on the outside while Penta was mid-cover on Cash. Fucking morons. So, long story short, it's a passable Lucha Bros match for a change, with a really good angle with the AAA belt that should have been the finish, and a bunch of no-sell bullshit that occurred afterwards that was typical of an AEW match. Next up, we had this wretchedly bad six-woman tag match. We were also informed going in that Nyla Rose allegedly put a bounty hit on Ruby Riott to, I guess, eliminate her from the TBS tournament or something. Despite the fact that we've never actually seen a physical check being made out to anyone on screen in any capacity. It's just something that Excalibur passingly mentions on commentary. And, if this were 1982 and they'd have actually bothered to spend some time crafting a clever bounty story like they did with Flair and Carey over a period of months, I may have at least bothered to humor them. But because AEW just randomly decides to thrust in storylines and expects me to give a fuck, I didn't. The only thing I can credit them for here is that at least they were smart enough to keep Penelope Ford out of the ring as long as possible. And of course, wouldn't be an AEW show if we did not get at least one backstage skit with someone attempting to cut a promo, getting abruptly cut off, and then getting into a chaotic brawl. Here at All Replication Wrestling. And this time it was FTR jumping Sting and Darby for some reason, while they dubbed in overly dramatic WWE commentary from Excalibur. Bush League. Then we had the official debut of Hook, which was something I was moderately looking forward to for some peculiar reason. I seriously thought they were going to run with the story of Hook being the longest running AEW talent to never have worked a single match in the company. I mean, that actually would have been a hell of a little gimmick. But they decided to debut him in a match with Fuego del Sol, and I mean, I thought it was fun. Probably would have been better if they'd had him steamroll Fuego in less than a minute instead of having him go 3. But it was cool. I don't know. On the surface, I guess, like, the one thing going into the match I was wondering was, why did they debut Hook on this show? Was it because they really didn't have a stacked enough cards, so they figured maybe the official Hook debut would be like a last minute attraction or something to bring in viewership? Possibly, but I mean, there really wasn't any reason to do this. I don't know. The other thing I'm not sold on either is the whole shoot fighter gimmick. And the thing that sucks is, like, ideally, Hook is the perfect character for that role in this company. And the fact that he's Taz's son, whose gimmick back in the day was that he was a shoot fighter from the streets of New York, like, it makes sense, you know what I mean? But then the reality sets in that they're pretty much doing this exact same thing with Eddie Kingston. And they've also done similar things with Dan Lambert's Top Team crew when they brought in the MMA fighters. I know Anthony Ogogo played up something similar with his boxing background when he was doing his thing with Cody. It's just, for my money, I don't like seeing repetitive gimmicks and ideas, like, especially when you've already had those roles filled to begin with. And if Hook's going to do the shoot-style fighter thing, they really need to monitor the other guys that are doing similar roles right now. Because eventually you're going to run into the problem where he's not going to stand out, and, like, he's eventually just going to turn into just another guy that does the martial arts style, and it's not going to mean anything. Just something to think about. And in our main event, a surefire way to make sure that viewership stays up, it is Adam Cole taking on Wheeler Yuta. Yeah, not Adam Cole versus a returning Trent Beretta. No, it's Adam Cole against the flunky of the already flunk-centric best friend dorks. Riveting. And for the record, I'm just curious. Not that anyone's going to be able to give me a solid answer to this, because I like trolling AEW defenders, what can I say? Whatever happened to the deal they were doing a while back where Tony Khan was banning teams from ringside to ensure matches didn't have run-ins? Remember they were doing that thing on like a string of 3 or 4 shows where the announcers kept informing us that Tony was actively barring guys from ringside to try and make sure matches had clean wins and didn't have copious amounts of bullshit going on? Interesting how they've dropped that all of a sudden. And honestly, you'd think after having watched more than, 5 AEW TV matches that maybe someone in management would logically step in and say, hey, maybe we shouldn't allow partners and teammates to accompany guys to the ring just to be on the safe side. So they had the match, and albeit, credit where it's due, they managed to control themselves for a change and just let 2 guys go out and work a match without a bunch of bullshit and interference. Amazing how much better that can make the segment work. Cole got the heat, Yuta made a comeback, they did a couple brief near falls at the end, and the finish was Cole getting his knees up after an attempted splash from Yuta. Cole did the little stare down with Cassidy, and then he killed Yuta with the boom. Clean as a sheet. And by AEW standards, that probably makes this an instant 4 3/4 star classic. By the way, Adam, from one relatively skinny small man to another, flexing your spaghetti arms in any capacity on this show, it's a no-go, bro. Unless you're going to hit the gym and bulk up your shoulders and your upper arms, don't do that shit. But of course, we have to put 20 bodies to use somehow on this show, so this leads to the afterbirth. Shocker, I know. Bobby Fish ended up running down and yanking out one of the dweebs. The Elite did their heat spots, and the lasting image of the show we see is Trent Beretta getting triple BTE triggered by the Beta Bucks and Cole. Yes, 2 days after Trent's big return to television after surgery. They couldn't even give the poor fucker a quick TV win before laying him out like a geek. 2 days. These people have no idea what they're doing. And I'm sure this will evidently lead to Trent getting his win back over Bobby Fish or something, but seriously, you couldn't wait a week before getting heat on Trent after he just came back after being gone for months? That's some Vince McMahon shit right there. What can I say about this show? Well, I'll give it this. It certainly didn't leave me as pissed off as I was after watching Dynamite on Wednesday. I still would like to know whether or not Julia Hart will ever get her vision restored again after having been misted in the face from Malachi Black, but perhaps it doesn't matter all that much. If anything, I was just relieved I got to watch a moderately competent Lucha Bros tag match for a change. Seeing FTR do another feud-ending job was kind of disappointing, but I think AEW was long since the point of return with those guys. They fucked those two up when they jobbed him out to the Bucks a year ago, and they've never been the same since. The rest of the show's an average, less offensive edition of AEW programming for a change. And like I said on Friday, I'm just going to keep my fingers crossed and hope for a quality show this coming Wednesday. It's a bigger show with a couple featured matches of intrigue, and, I am particularly looking forward to seeing what they do with Paige and Danielson for the world title in the main event. But, yeah, the series of the last Dynamite and Rampage shows, the trend's continuing, just relatively monotonous to not good programming. That's all I can really say about it. This, again, just felt like another buffer show. Which, to be blunt, is kind of what Rampage has felt like. I hate to say it, but aside from the CM Punk return on Rampage over the summer, this show it's kind of been a big miss for AEW. And I've been on record saying that in a way I kind of enjoy the Rampage show more than Dynamite just because of the fact that it's only an hour, but yeah, the show just really hasn't been doing a lot for me lately. I don't know if it's the card that they're putting together for a lot of these shows, but it just feels like a third extension of Dynamite. It doesn't feel like its own unique show. I don't know. There's just something not clicking with this Rampage thing. And I'm certainly not going to advocate that they need to expand another hour because, God, that's the last fucking thing this company needs is to do another hour of programming. But they really could use a shake-up with this whole Rampage idea because it's sort of hit a wall. That's probably the best way I can put it. I'll cover a little bit more of AEW at the end of the show with my article analysis, but for now I do want to move on to a brief overview of the ROH Final Battle show from this past weekend before we circle back to AEW. Much like our ever so bold and brave press secretary, Jen Psaki. And I should point out initially, I had no intentions of watching this pay-per-view this weekend, but considering NWA wasn't doing a next set of tapings from the Hard Times fallout, I had a little bit of free time on Sunday afternoon and figured, fuck it, I'm going to check it out and see what I get out of it. I have not watched an ROH show in, oh God, I don't even know how long. It has been a few years. But I also knew going in that this was going to be their big send-off before they go dark for a period of time. If they even do end up coming back next year in any capacity. I mean, it's really up in the air given their current financial situation. I have not followed Ring of Honor's product consistently for probably going on 4 or 5 years now. Whenever the period was where the Bucks and Cody started dominating the show and the product started turning into another glorified PWG indie fuckfest, like, that was around the point where I kind of tapped out and said that this product just isn't for me anymore. And especially when guys like Adam Cole and Red Dragon and Roderick Strong started showing up in NXT, I mean, that was kind of like the breaking point. The special appearances from some of the AEW guys was pretty interesting, especially Adam Page and Cole and CM Punk and Bryan Danielson. I think if they were going to do these little special tribute interviews sporadically throughout the night, it was crucial that they go with a lot of the bread and butter originals, especially Punk and Danielson. I think it would have been great if they could have maybe gotten AJ and Joe in there to do a few minutes, but I mean, I understand that's not really doable. But seeing and hearing some of the bigger names share a few words throughout the show, that was cool. The audio was shit for a lot of these pre-tapes, so it was hard to understand a word anyone said. Yeah, audio problems with Ring of Honor. Breaking news, I know. Some things never change, right? And I'm not going to spend too long running down the card here, because I don't really have a whole lot to say about the matches in particular, but just sharing a little insight from a casual viewing perspective, I guess you could say. Ray Harus and Dragon Lee in the opener was one of those modern, spot-oriented, no-sell, back-and-forth crowd pleasers. Really wasn't for me, but the people enjoyed it. I've seen a handful of Dragon Lee matches, more of his New Japan stuff than his actual ROH stuff. Some of his tag work with ROH was also pretty solid. And he's definitely someone I could see AEW trying to pick up down the line. And, I mean, honestly, it might not be a bad investment, especially if they're looking for a guaranteed merch seller. I mean, God knows Fuego del Sol's done any bit of good for them since they signed him, but, I mean, they could use a masked character, sort of that Lucha style that contrasts from what Phoenix and Pentagon do. Like a single star, like their Rey Mysterio equivalent, I guess you could say. I think Dragon Lee would be a good addition to the company. Ray Harus, I think I remember seeing a couple of his matches in MLW. What was that, back in 2019 when I was watching the product? Like I said, not my flavor of match, but it at least never got to Young Bucks level of ridiculousness with all the kickouts and no selling. Joe Hendry, Silas Young, Rhett Titus, and Dalton Castle in a 4-way for the television title was alright. I've always been a big fan of Silas Young. I always thought he was criminally underrated, and he just looks like an old school badass heel. The dude can cut a hell of a promo too. I've heard a lot of his promo work before. Rhett Titus, obviously I remember a lot of his work with Kenny King and the All Night Express years back. Very good tag team. Even though Kenny was clearly the more charismatic guy in the duo, and as we saw, he went on for bigger and better things in the business. Dalton Castle, I really never dug his vibe all that much. In fact, I think it was right around the point when he won the ROH World title. That was the point where I really started getting down on the product, whenever that was. Was that like 2017, 2018, somewhere in there? Yeah, I just never got the character. It always felt really out of place in Ring of Honor. And I even vaguely remember his matches never being anything to write that home about either. And Joe Hendry, I honestly have zero knowledge of him, other than the fact that he's clearly adopting some kind of Cody Rhodes bad blonde hair dye formula. Castle was doing a bunch of weird clowny shit during this that kind of distracted from the match, if I'm being honest. Like the thing he was doing, the Adam Rose shuffle up the aisleway with his Peacock posse. But like I said, people were totally into him, so I guess it worked. He did a lot of the typical multi-man spots here, like trying to steal pins and spending a lot of time sneaking in the back door after guys would hit an offensive move. Aside from that, really not much else to say about it. I don't really know what Titus winning the belt means at this point, but got a pretty big reaction. And they played it up as Rhett's first big singles title win, which, I mean, again, does it really matter? Unless he shows up in the NWA or something to do a couple title defenses, I don't really see the point of it, but congrats to him. Brian Johnson versus Josh Woods in one of those pure wrestling matches, Delia Bob things. Again, it's been so long since I followed ROH. I'll be honest, I had no idea who either of these guys were. Johnson did one of those overly scripted WWE promos before the match where I honestly had no idea whether or not he was trying to be a face or a heel. The original idea was kind of inspired from the Bill Watts Mid-South UWF match regulations, like no closed fists, that whole deal. But they added their little twist to the rules here. Guys can only get 3 rope breaks, and can't remember if they ever established a no over-the-top rule with the original Pure Wrestling match. Maybe it was still a thing. I don't know. It was a cool idea for the time. The whole rope break thing, I always kind of thought that was wonky and overbooked, but it does make for some intricate match finish ideas. Woods ended up submitting Johnson on the top rope with one of those standing triangle choke clutches to retain. And the story they played out was that Johnson had exhausted all of his rope breaks early on, and that basically cost him in the end. So, this is a cool little idea. Really not much else to say about it, though. Shane Taylor and Kenny King in a fight without honor match. Basically just window dressing for your standard garbage hardcore match, and it's pretty much what they had. Tables, ladders, kendo sticks, garbage cans, whole kit and caboodle. No one was set on fire here, so by all accounts, it was immediately 10 times better than the Cody Rhodes-Andrade street fight a couple weeks ago. Again, hardcore matches are SOS for me at this point. They've been done to death. I don't care about them anymore, and I don't really think any new territory was explored here that I haven't seen in 100 previous garbage street fight matches in the last 5 to 10 years. So if you enjoyed it, you enjoyed it. If this is your style of wrestling, good on you. Women's match I skipped over entirely. I don't even want to go there. I rant enough about bad AEW women's matches every week. I don't need to elaborate anymore on that. The 8-man was a complete and utter mess, if I'm being frank, but the only thing that mattered with that was the angle that happened afterwards. Of course, with Rocky Romero in there, literally 10 seconds into the match, and the announcers were already talking about Orange Cassidy, Trent's mom, the minivan, and all the other Bush League undercard garbage going on with the other station. Good to see shredded EC3 again. Love that guy. Still kind of disappointed he was never given a fair shake in WWE before they unceremoniously let him go. The stuff with him, Homicide, and the Fork was comically retarded. Just a great prime example of EC3 not giving a single fuck and saying, I'm here for a paycheck. Let's do this ridiculous spot, get it done and over with. And it looked just about as hokey as you would imagine. And the whole thing with everyone at the end stealing everyone's famous finishing moves. All right, whatever. Homicide's cop killer finisher. It's a completely ridiculous move, mostly in the sense that it's something that, if executed in real life, would legitimately kill somebody. But, of course, in modern wrestling where everyone kicks out of everything, it just makes it even more ridiculous. It is a sick-looking finisher, I'll give it that. But, like, when you put real perspective on it for a sec, you're like, wait a minute. So he hoists the guy up upside down over his back, and air quote, drops him on his head and neck. Like, you're fucking dead. Like, there's no other way to put it. And obviously, like, they do all the camera angles to hide the fact that guys are basically just landing on their upper shoulders and back. So, I don't know. It's like the Canadian Destroyer. It's very cooperative, but, I mean, it does look sick. So, I'll give it that. Again, the stuff at the end with EC3 doing the promo and getting interrupted by the former Wesley Blake and Braun Strowman. It was interesting. I don't really see the point in debuting a new faction when you're basically going to be MIA from television for Lord knows how long. But, you know, if it ends up turning into something where they show up as a unit elsewhere down the road, that could be pretty interesting. Honestly, if NWA had a fucking clue, they would sign up EC3 to an exclusive contract ASAP. Yeah, actually, truth be told, I could see this whole unit working in NWA in some capacity. I wasn't sure who the other guy was. The other guy that came out with Blake. I don't think I've ever seen him before. I gotta do some research and see if he's another former WWE reject. The Briscoes versus OGK for the tag titles started off pretty good, but very quickly descended into false finish fuckery by the end, and they kind of lost me in the last 5 to 10 minutes. I know this will absolutely destroy Jim Cornette's little heart, but I mean, I'm a straight shooter, so why hold back now? I've never been a big Briscoes guy. It's kind of one of those things where they've been around for years. I don't know, you see one Briscoes match, you've kind of seen them all. Like, there's stuff with the Kings of Wrestling and Haas and Benjamin from, like, way back in 2010, 2011, whenever that period was. Those were some of the best Briscoes matches I've ever seen. And I also really enjoyed the period a few years ago where they split them up and had them pursue singles runs for a bit of time. I think, didn't Jay end up winning the world title at one point? But, I don't know. They're a solid team. They're sure as fuck over with the ROH fan base, like you wouldn't imagine. I've just never seen, like, superstar tag team like other people have with them. I don't know. Just always felt like something was missing with them. But like I said, this match just had way too many kick-out and false finishes for me. And I get they wanted to do the crazy WrestleMania main event style match, and it worked for the crowd. But, I don't know, it just got way too hokey and cute for me at the end. And, if I'm going to shit on AEW for doing the same kind of stuff, I'm not going to exclude other companies when they do the same thing. So, didn't care for the match. Now, the stuff afterwards with FTR answering the open challenge deal, I can get down with that. I think that's a dream match a lot of people would like to see, and I mean, I love me some FTR, and if that's something that they're going to arrange on an AEW show in early 2022, it'll sure as hell sell some additional pay-per-view buys. And trust me, if AEW is not completely retarded, they'll make sure they save that match for a pay-per-view. If they put that shit on free TV, well, I won't even go there. So, I'm definitely looking forward to that. And, if it turns out AEW ends up signing the Briscoes exclusively, again, could be very interesting. I just worry how long they wait until they start pairing them in matches against the Beta Bucks and the Best Friends, where I'll start losing respect for them. Guess we'll see what they want to do. And the main event, it was Jay Lethal and Jonathan Gresham for the Ring of Honor World Championship, and that was very good. I think I read that Jay was a last-minute replacement in this match for Bandito, who apparently tested positive for COVID last minute, which sucks for him. That's really unfortunate timing. But I certainly won't complain about Lethal taking his spot here. In all my years of wrestling, I cannot recall a single Jay Lethal match off the top of my head that I have not enjoyed. And we're going way back in the time machine. Like, 2007, 2008, somewhere in there, like way back in his TNA days, like when he was doing the whole Black Machismo thing. And this match was no different than the rest. Great professional wrestling. They kept things serious. The ebb and flow in this match was pretty much perfect. I think, unlike a lot of other matches on the show, this was the first match of the night where it actually felt like they were building to a real climax. I think that was the problem with a lot of other matches on the show that were so spot-centric, is they were just like kicking out of everything left and right. Like most of the matches felt like they were constantly pushing a stop and start button, whereas with Lethal and Gresham, like it actually had some drama that they were trying to capture in the lead into the finish, and it made all the difference in the world once we got there. The stuff at the end with the ROH crew coming out to cheer on Gresham before he submitted Lethal and the Octopus, I thought that was a nice touch. And, him winning the title here was a nice feel-good moment for a lot of the crowd. It's interesting. I mean, they're really dead set on returning to television in April or May of next year, whenever month they said. And I can't rule it out entirely, but it's just really weird. And the story development around Ring of Honor in the next several months are going to be very fascinating. Honestly, I think a lot of the conversation mostly really boils down to the simple question of, does Tony Khan want to outright buy the product? Does he see it as a financial investment worth pursuing? Or does he sort of see a necessary market for a third brand product where, like, even if AEW ends up working a more exclusive contract with Ring of Honor in the coming year, it would be enough to get them back in the market in a bigger capacity than where they're at right now? I really don't know. I think a potential problem that they're going to run into is whether or not AEW winds up signing certain guys to exclusive deals, or God forbid some of them want to decide to go to WWE for whatever reason. One thing that definitely stood out to me watching the show, though, is just how gutted a lot of the bigger name talent is. Take out the Briscoes from the equation, star power was really lacking on the ROH side of the equation. And seeing guys like Cole and Punk and Danielson and... I mean, fuck it, I'll even throw them in there, as much as I can't stand them. Like, even the Beta Bucks making an on-screen appearance really put into perspective how lacking the big stars in Ring of Honor right now are. And Jay Lethal locking horns with AEW is just another prime example of that. If the Briscoes decide they'd rather hedge their bets and sign with AEW instead of waiting for some grace of God to reinstate the company in 2022, probably wouldn't be a wrong investment, especially if they want to get a few more years out of their career. Obviously, they're not going to WWE, so I don't think anyone needs to worry about that. But yeah, the talent pool on this show, is a lot different. It is a lot different from when I stopped watching. So, and like overall, I mean, I didn't have much of a sentimental feeling of the show like other people probably did. But I also know for a lot of long-time Ring of Honor fans, this is probably a show that hit home for a lot of people when it was over. And honestly, the only thing I can really hope for is that things work out where by the time we get to early summer, late spring of next year, we see some kind of resurgence of Ring of Honor. I know I joke about it all the time, but I do think a third niche brand or product is kind of needed right now in the business. And I know ROH has managed to fill that void for a lot of fans over the years. And when I say niche brand, I should also point out that what I really mean by that is something that the wrestling market desperately needs as a credible, serious niche brand. Not that GCW indie hardcore fuckfest garbage or the low-rent bar shows that draw 50 people. I'm talking about a real credible alternative third branch product that people can get emotionally invested into, ideally something with a good television deal, which I know Ring of Honor has also struggled to ever get and maintain with that too, but ROH has always kind of been like the closest thing to the alternative product when it comes to wrestling. Like, yeah, you've had Impact Wrestling and things like that over the years, but like ROH has been around for a long time, and it always has been a product directed specifically for the hardcore fan base. And WWE doesn't appeal to that. And AEW does appeal to that. But because they're on such a bigger playing field right now, there's a dilemma that comes into play when they just strictly primarily hone in to the hardcore fan base. And I think for a product like AEW right now, they should be trying to branch out. And again, I'm going to be talking about this in my article, so I don't want to get too into detail about that right now, but as a stable, credible third brand that has a very specific fan base that they're trying to go after and target, Ring of Honor has always been that product. And I would hate to see it just dissipate altogether. I think there's a lot of potential that could come out of this. I think a more exclusive partnership deal with AEW could help them out in the long term. So, like, again, staying posted with the news is going to be very interesting going forward, and I am definitely going to follow this. But yeah, I will just leave it at that. I know a lot of these guys are going to get picked up by AEW, NWA, or other indie markets in the short term, so it's not like these guys are going to be begging for food scraps in the coming year or anything like that. They're going to be fine financially. They're going to have stable jobs. So for the people that are worrying that these guys are going to find themselves on the streets, just don't buy into that crap. But as far as like a send-off pay-per-view, I mean, this is probably as good as you could get. It's definitely not the same Ring of Honor product that I watched even 4 or 5 years ago, but for where we are in the business today, this was probably the best offering that you could possibly ask for. And the attendance was good for the show, too. It was certainly a hell of a lot better than that Hard Times show I watched last week. So there are people that still follow this company and are loyal to it in some capacity. So it's good that they still have that niche fan base, but like I said, I'm definitely going to keep posted with this news going forward. All right. So, as you've probably been able to tell, given the last several AEW show reports I've done, I have been rather harsh on these recent Dynamite and Rampage editions. And granted, there's a lot of on-the-nose facetiousness that comes along with my reporting. I understand that sometimes my dry personality does not always give the clear intention that I am trying to have a good time with these reports. But I also think it's important to remember that there are a lot of elements of AEW's product that I do enjoy. And if you've followed this channel for the last few months now, you'll notice the lack of WWE content that we focus on with this channel, aside from the occasional article discussions here and there. And there's a reason for that. I've completely given up any and all hope of main roster WWE programming, and as we've seen with the direction NXT has decided to go, it's just a format change that really doesn't appeal to me all that much. I tried it, got through about a month or so of watching the product, and the reality quickly set in that in the long term, I'm really not going to have anything productive to say about that show going forward. And even if I have my fair share of problems with AEW, I look at it this way. There are always going to be at least enough good things that appeal to me that I can still get enjoyment out of watching the program. And as crazy as it may be to think about, we are going to be coming up on year 3 for AEW. And whether we want to acknowledge it or not, a lot has changed with the company just in a couple years. It's still not a perfect show, but the AEW that I am seeing in current day 2021 is far and away superior to whatever in the hell they were trying to flaunt out on television pre-pandemic and for the majority of the empty arena era of wrestling. There's a lot less comedy, a lot less stupidity in the booking. They've toned down a lot of the outlaw characters and gimmicks to an extent, and generally it just feels like a more major league product than when I first started watching. You know, the additions of CM Punk and Bryan Danielson have made all the difference in the world, and it shows, you know, even if the ratings might not always reflect that. But when I watch AEW now, the first thing I think is it feels like a bigger league product. So as we transition into the new year and everyone starts to devise their own list of AEW 22 predictions, I want to focus my attention on three specific areas that AEW still needs to address in the coming year in order to improve the quality of their product. Like I said, they made a lot of good changes from when they first started, but there's still a few chinks in the armor that need some handling. And I'm going to break those down here as we analyzed my recent Chairshot article entitled 3 Important Things AEW Needs to Get Right in 2022. And the first thing I'm going to touch on here is roster prioritization and cutting dead weight. As I just noted, this is an area AEW looks to have started addressing, at least when it comes to the cutting dead weight part. There are accumulations of some of the more household names like Punk, Danielson, Adam Cole, just to name a few. It's been a huge improvement for the roster. And quite honestly, something that a lot of people were saying was one of the key things holding AEW back in a lot of ways was the lack of household established star power. And Danielson was a very big talent acquisition for them this year in and of himself, but the fact that they were able to lock him and CM Punk down, I mean, that's a twofer bonus in ways that people can't possibly imagine. I look at it this way. For AEW, Danielson and Punk are their Rock and Austin. And, you throw in a couple more former WWE established names in there like FTR and Adam Cole and Malachi Black and Miro and Andrade. Despite the fact that a lot of those guys have been booked like shit since they first arrived, if you just view that from name value alone, it is a hell of a lot more than what AEW had to work with just 2 years ago when they were still pushing geeks like Joey Janela and Jimmy Havoc and Marco Stunt and Kip Sabian every week. And as we have seen, these guys have slowly vanished from the show altogether, more than likely not to get released once their contracts come up. So that is a key improvement. However, that being said, there's still another key factor that AEW needs to address when it comes to roster prioritization. They've seen quite the expanse in their roster depth since 2019. And while that certainly is a good thing for someone like Tony Khan to basically be able to afford signing whoever he wants, the one thing AEW has struggled with since their expansion of the talent pool is being able to effectively feature particular talents over extended periods of times. And I even make mention in my article here that given the fact that we're essentially looking at a roster assembly in the triple digits by this point, it's virtually impossible to be able to feature guys effectively when you have such a bloated roster. So what we wind up seeing are instances where in order to give guys and gals more, quote, screen time, everyone ends up getting paired and grouped into a bunch of clustered factions. You get things like Matt Hardy Enterprises, where it's literally just a bunch of guys playing background roles and doing mass beatdowns, and no one stands out, no one gets spotlighted effectively. It's been a booking disaster for AEW, and it's something that if you read more show recaps and reports, even the most diehard of the diehard AEW defenders out there are even pointing this out as a heavy criticism of the product. Too many matches with too many run-ins and too many people getting involved. And as we've seen, the expansion of adding an additional Friday night show and expanding on some of the dark shows really isn't improving to be much of a solution to the dilemma of too many bodies, not enough time. Now, because I consider myself a nice guy, I am going to provide what I deem as a potential solution to the problem. And I start with a basic premise of assuming that AEW is going to refrain from going with any kind of brand split between Dynamite and Rampage, which is fine. I don't think it's needed, and I mean, let's be honest, WWE's fucked up the concept of brand splits so badly anymore. I don't think anyone's going to care either way if AEW would do that down the road. Which means that their solution really boils down to using an old school territorial booking approach. And with this, I'm thinking they choose between 10 to 15 wrestlers to primarily feature on their main TV shows for like a 2 to 3 month time frame, and they're building up to pay-per-views and TV specials throughout this time. And the end goal is to build 3 or 4 compelling programs with a strict focus on putting over the importance of those storylines and programs, while the lesser important material temporarily takes a back seat. In the meantime, use your AEW Dark and YouTube shows to begin slow, methodical character progression of the guys and gals that you eventually want to feature in your next cycle on the roster. The other detail in this booking formula is to ensure that they are only allotting screen time to the ready-for-TV talent. That means cutting back on the heavy usage of spotlighting the green and experienced talent, unless they're going to be used in some kind of squash or quick enhancement match to put someone else over. And keep in mind, this is not me preaching that AEW shouldn't put green talent on TV at all. What I'm saying is, AEW needs to abstain from focusing too much time and attention to the greener talent until, honestly, they can competently work a TV match without getting lost or royally fucking up. In addition, it would be nice if they could cut a halfway decent promo and they've actually crafted their character and personality effectively for television. Right now, AEW's biggest dilemma when it comes to their talent pool is something that I coin in my article as the ongoing JAG, just another guy syndrome. And you probably heard me rant about this in my AEW recaps. AEW has a lot of JAGs and not a lot of swag. I call that superstar with a glamour. They have a few potential diamonds in the rough, like MJF and Ricky Starks, but when I do a quick overview of AEW's current talent pool, those MJFs and Ricky Stark types of characters, those guys are far and few between right now. And again, I will continue to reiterate this cliche because it is essential for AEW to remember in 2022. When you try to spotlight everyone, you end up spotlighting no one. Second point I want to talk about here is a necessity to market and brand to mainstream audiences. And this is another thing that I talk about a lot in my AEW recaps. I get it. AEW's primary demographic is males 18 to 49. It's their key demo, it's the audience that AEW primarily targets, and that's the audience that they're poised to appeal to. But, I've said this before, and I will say it again. If AEW is going to grow and succeed as a company in 5 to 10 years, they need to reach new viewers and new audiences. Something that AEW still struggles with when it comes to effective marketing is with their presupposition that everybody that watches their product understands every intricate detail and inner working of every storyline they do. Whether that's the undercard stuff they're booking on the dark shows, whether it's exclusive internet footage of stuff they run on YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, other social media platforms, it's the same problem every time. It is a poor business model to assume that everyone that watches your show knows what's going on at all given times, especially for the real insider stuff that only the hardest of the hardcore AEW fans are going to know about. And whether it's stuff that goes on with being the elite or like even an example I note in my article here, and this one stuck out to me because I remember watching this segment happen live, and when it was over, the only thing I could think was, How in the fuck would any run-of-the-mill TV viewer know what was going on here given the way they explain this? You guys remember the segment on Dynamite a few weeks back where they had Tomohiro Ishii make his debut match with the Best Friends, and I think they faced the Butcher and the Blade in a tag match? And they were trying to rationalize all this stuff on commentary about how New Japan's Chaos faction had assembled the Best Friends into their faction, and now they're one big happy unit now. Meanwhile, the only thing I could think the entire time was, how in the fuck would any casual wrestling fan that doesn't follow New Japan Pro Wrestling know anything that was going on here? Who's Tomohiro Ishii? What is Chaos? Why are they affiliated in the first place? What is so significant about Chaos and New Japan? All these questions that I had, just me putting on the cap of the average mainstream wrestling fan. Questions that honestly could have probably been answered with a simple 2-minute video package or a promo segment. But again, it is AEW's presumption of the privy hardcore fan coming into the fold. It's, well, I mean, obviously everyone that watches AEW follows New Japan, so there's no need to explain the significance of all this because everyone gets it anyway. And all the while, the people that don't understand it, the ones that have no idea what's going on and are given no rhyme or reason to care about it, what do? They go, click, click, click. And they watch something else. And I'll read this quote from my article here because, honestly, I have no better way to summarize it. It is always better to dumb story down for the audience by some off chance that a fan needs context or reason behind a given match or story. And I know what you're thinking. Well, doesn't that establish that fans are stupid and ignorant? Well, yeah. Think about it logically for a minute. When a new film is coming to theaters, or a new TV series is about to start up on a given network, what's the first thing that you always see before that debuts? A video promo. Why? Because there's a recognition that people are going to want context as to what they're about to see, especially if they're going to pay money to see it in theaters or subscribe to watch it on a streaming service. The same thing usually works in pro wrestling. Most people are not going to buy a wrestling pay-per-view if they are not given some kind of clear indication as to what the card is and what the stories are leading into the show. Now, yes, of course, you'll always have the hardcore marks that'll buy the show just because there's a certain name on the show. I mean, honestly, you see that a lot with the independent shows today. So, I'll grant you, it's a little different with the wrestling market, especially with AEW's product. Believe me, there are dumb fucks that would give AEW money hand over fist, even if the main event for one of their pay-per-views was Joey Janela and Marco Stunt and Orange Cassidy in a 3-way 60-minute Iron Man exploding barbed wire death match. They'd probably still say it was 6.25 stars, because that's how stupid professional wrestling is in 2021. But you get my point. Traditionally, this is how wrestling tickets sold and did big house numbers at the gate back in the day. Matches would be promoted and things would be given context as to why people should want to pay money to see it live. So again, to reiterate here, marketing and branding to casual mainstream audiences. Focus on growing your networking and audiences. Use the Jurassic Express in more kid-friendly skits. Cut back on all the gratuitous cursing and the childish shit jokes. Find your universal, well-respected, all-American babyface that every fan can get behind, both hardcore and casual viewers. Who is your modern-day Jimmy Valiant? Who's your Dusty Rhodes? Who's your Ric Flair? Who's your Sting, your modern-day Sting? I mean, the closest thing that they have to that on the roster right now, for my money, is probably Dustin Rhodes, but problem is he isn't featured prominently enough on TV to make that big a difference. Like I said, two names that immediately come to mind when I think of potential all-around well-respected talents that would appeal to anyone, male or female, from age 6 to 66. I'm thinking of Jungle Boy and Luchasaurus. The female demographic would fall in love with Jungle Boy, they'd get a kick out of Luchasaurus, the kids would love Jungle Boy, and especially Luchasaurus. Now, how could any young kid not love a fucking giant guy in a dinosaur mask that does flips and kicks and roars during promos? And obviously, hardcore male fans already have a built-in appreciation for Jungle Boy and Luchasaurus given their upbringing on the indie circuit and the fact that they're really good in-ring workers. So those are two names that jump out to me immediately. And I'm sure you'll find other guys in your company that eventually will meet that point. But that should be your primary focus. Your all-around white meat American babyface that appeals to everybody of every age demographic, both genders, doesn't matter. Someone that you know for a fact can be and will be universally loved and respected. That's something I think they should really focus on. The last talking point here I want to touch on is formatting. And I know I spent a lot of time on this when I debunked the sheer stupidity of that horribly botched Julia Hart angle on Dynamite, but pro wrestling angles. God, angles in pro wrestling used to fucking mean something back in the day. You want to know the reason why fans remember Andre turning heel on Hogan and ripping the cross necklace off of him in '87? You want to know why people remember Shawn turning on Marty in the barber shop and breaking up the Rockers? The Roddy Piper Jimmy Snuka coconut incident? Or, God forbid, how Baby Doll turned face in '86? The reason these are remembered as such classic angles in pro wrestling really boils down to the simple fact that angles in wrestling used to be standouts. They used to be rarities. They didn't occur in every God-blessed segment of every God-blessed wrestling show. And I even name-dropped the Attitude Era in my Dynamite report as one of the real catalysts that helped destroy the value of wrestling angles. And yes, a lot of that had to do with where the business was by that point. Obviously, you had the war between WCW and WWF, where the concept of Crash TV became the status quo of that time. And over time, it just became second nature to what fans would expect out of the shows week in and week out. That element of surprise was what kept so many people intrigued, never knowing what the hell was going to happen when they watched the show every week. And for the time, it was probably a necessity. But when you look back with hindsight, and you factor in all the matches and segments on Nitro and Raw, with run-ins and interferences and brawls and beatdowns and DQ finishes and chaos and pandemonium from start to finish, admittedly so, whether people want to believe it or not, it was sometimes a detriment to both products. Matches started to mean less and less. Things would be such rapid fire in terms of pacing from beginning to end that a lot of things would never have room to breathe, and it just generally was hard to keep track of a lot of shit that was going on. And the problem with that Crash TV approach is that while it may have worked for the business during the late 90s, AEW trying to replicate that same model in 2021 might not be the wisest business decision. Because as we see where the business is now, and we recognize that whatever artificial war we want to try and comprise in our minds that was going on between AEW and WWE, we can have that debate another time, and I've written a full article on that already if you want to go read about it. But the one thing we can't deny is that this AEW versus WWE war is nowhere near on the level of where things were between WCW and WWF 20 plus years ago. No matter how much we may crave for the business to reach the heights that it was in the late 90s, it ain't coming back. Get over it. Move on. And when I see AEW trying to adopt the whole Attitude Era Crash TV booking approach to their programming in 2021, just brings me back to a lot of complaints I had about the WWF from that 99 to 2001 period. Yes, there were some great moments during that time. But there was also a lot of really bad booking and terrible storylines and just plain bad television. And truth be told, the only reason that it worked back then was that, unlike in 2021, I know people are not going to like hearing this, but wrestling used to actually have megastars that were super over. You had your Rocks, your Austins, your Foleys, your Undertakers, your Kurt Angles, your Kanes, your Triple H's, your Ken Shamrocks, etc. Even some of your mid-card and undercard acts, your New Age Outlaws, your Al Snows, your Crash Hollies, your Big Boss Mans, your Hardy Boys, your Dudley Boys. Wrestling has no one at that star level in AEW in 2021. Give or take, maybe Chris Jericho. Maybe Chris Jericho. And even he's sort of fallen off the map in recent years with his level of overexposure. And I love Punk and I love Danielson. And even if I would classify those guys as AEW's equivalent to Rock and Austin, Punk and Danielson aren't in the same stratosphere when it comes to star power of a Rock or an Austin. The point I'm making with this whole Crash TV approach is that when you use this as an approach to formatting, and you got multiple matches and segments with run-ins and shenanigans and angles and brawls in a 1 to 2 hour gap, it starts to toe that line of becoming too much. And again, some of that may revert back to the problem of AEW having too many cooks in the kitchen with the people they're trying to efficiently spotlight on television every week. But the other dilemma when they do this kind of programming is that a lot of the time, it comes off as WWE light. And with AEW making it their mission to be everything anti-WWE and counterculture to what the other company's doing, they need to be avoiding anything possible at coming off as a watered-down version of WWE programming. And again, the solution kind of reverts back to the marketing and formatting from a territorial standpoint. If you're going to do a big angle on a show, that's fine. I'm not saying you shouldn't do angles in wrestling, but limit it to 1, maybe 2 if it's a bigger show. This way, angles feel special. They have room to breathe. The announcers can spend time discussing the significance without needlessly forgetting about them the minute they end. Again, see Julia Hart getting misted in the fucking face and it not getting a single mention when they come back from commercial break, because they got too much crap going on. So those are really my main points that I feel AEW needs to focus on in the coming year. And yes, there are plenty more things that need attention, but as far as like big picture issues, these are the ones that stand out above the rest to me. And you can feel free to chime in on other things that you think I missed out on if you'd like. And again, this article is posted right now in the description if you want to read it over and get further clarification on a couple of my talking points. But that said, that'll wrap things up for the show this week. If you all want to stay posted with future FSWR content, make sure you subscribe, comment, rate the show for me. And we will be back on Friday for the continuation of our retro review series. And we'll also be analyzing AEW's Winter is Coming show. But the real question is winter truly coming this year? Actually, given the radar lately, it probably doesn't look like things will start really picking up until January at the earliest. It's been a relatively lukewarm winter thus far, but I also live in Pennsylvania, so maybe it's a little different in other parts of the country. I don't know how much snow other states have gotten since winter, but I guess we will see. Until Friday, take care all. Peace out.